Our guest today is popularly known as Chiku, Catherine Wanjiku Ndugu Case, is the founder of Chezanami Foundation. She believes in the transformative power of cultural education and diversity awareness. The organization she founded strives to create a world where individuals of all ages and backgrounds can connect and learn to celebrate their unique identities. Thank you very much for joining us on Sankofa Pan African series, Wanjiku. I'm really excited to be chatting to you about your awesome children's book, Wanjiku, Child of Mine. And we'll be starting with you reading an excerpt from it, and then we'll go on to questions that I'm sure other readers of this fascinating books will be dying to have answered by you. So please, can we have an excerpt from Wanjiku, Child of Mine?
Thank you, Dr. Bunmi. I'm going to read a part that means a lot to me. Wajiko, your porridge, Shushu says. Today I am lucky. I get the porridge at the bottom of the pot. It's crunchy, smoky, burnt, roasted, crusty and thick, sprinkled with salt. Shosho only gives it to her favorite grandchild of the day. I get the bottom bit of porridge a lot. Now everybody gets ready for the day. The mamas and tatas come from their huts and Guka from his, ready to go to work. And all my cousins come out in their school uniforms and head down to the path for learning. I'm one of the younger ones, and I head out to the pasture herding the cows with my two cousins. As we walk through the grass, I remember the night before. Tell me again, Shosho, where does my name come from? I said. And she recited for me again the story of Gikoyo and Mombi. Gai took Gikoyo to the top of Mount Kirinyaga and gave him all the land stretching as far as the eyes could see. Gikoyo went down from the top of the mountain and found Mombi already there. They had 9 beautiful daughters. You, my precious Wanjiko, Wajiko Kamoro, Wajiko small, you are one of the daughters of the first man and woman in our world, Shushu said. One of the cows is going astray. I take a stick and I herd it back in place. I, Wanjiko, the daughter of Mombi, Agikoyu, a child of the first man and first woman.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad that's the piece you chose, because it kind of, when I was reading it, it drew me back to reading Ngugi wa Thiong'o's The River Between, where that story about origin story, also plays an important part. Now, so what inspired you to start writing for children?
So it's funny because a lot of people will say this, and I feel like it's such a cliche, but for me, when I became a parent, I had preemies, and I was in the trajectory of pursuing the American dream of working the corporate world. But my preemies threw me a curveball, and I had to actually retreat my maternity leave because at 6 weeks they were still in the NICU, so I had no choice. I'd lost all of my maternity leave. I decided to just quit and come home, and so my kids really drew me a curveball because then I was intentionally focused on just them. And as they were growing, I felt just this very strong desire to paint the vivid pictures of my own childhood experiences. And I wanted to read them stories so that they can know where I was from and they can have that feeling of warmth. I talk about the porridge at the bottom of the pot and getting that from my grandmother. I really yearned for them to experience that. And so I thought I would write a story for them, for my
Mm,
own children to read it, because we loved to read. We loved cuddling at bedtime.
mm,
So through founding the nonprofit that was really the impetus for most of this, called Chezanami Foundation, I realized that the narratives, my own narrative, was missing in stories that my children and I were reading together during that time. And then as I was expanding the partnerships with other artistic partners who are similarly like me, immigrants from Africa, a lot of African artists here and the diaspora, their narratives were similarly underrepresented.
mm.
So it became my mission to contribute to that tapestry. And so writing was one of those things that I thought would be a way to close that gap.
Mm. I was just gonna say that it's incredible how, your children led, and it's not a cliche actually. It is just a truism because I started writing for children when I actually lived at home in Nigeria, but it was my children who inspired me to write because it was at a time when um, they were into all kinds of foreign children's books,
Yeah.
and I was determined to get them to start reading African writers, and there were just not enough stuff out there for children, and so I started making up stories for their bedtime. I remember the very first one I made was called Joe and His Dog, and then it grew and grew into something that I was able to turn into a book, Fabulous Four. So it's not a cliche at all. It's just it's admirable, because there are so many other things that could have kept you away from doing this awesome work you're doing, because I do believe that writing culturally relevant stories, for our children, wherever they are, is really, an important part of, balancing out the world, a world where there's very little representation of us out there. So thank you.
No,
Thank
and
you.
to be in the same shoes as you, Dr. Bulmi, and all of the many authors who've come before me who are doing this work, you absolutely said it right. The impact that we're going to have for future generations of children,
Mm,
where they can see themselves,
yeah.
the uniqueness of the different stories that can be told. Because you're from Nigeria, I'm from Kenya. There, and in between, think about all of the diversity of stories in between that we have yet to capture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's to be a part of this community of folks who are looking for ways to contribute to that. It's an honor, and it's just so exciting.
It is. It is. So, what do you hope Wanjiku Child of Mine how do you hope it would impact the children who read it?
I hope that they can embrace the idea that your own individual story is unique, is beautiful, and is worth telling.
Important.
Everybody has a voice
Hmm.
that is needed in our world. And nobody can speak for you. That's what I hope that children will read this, will get excited about. Oh, wait, what's my relationship with my family?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that your family is important, they're the ones who nurture you.
Yeah.
If I talk about my grandma, maybe they'll want
Yes.
to think about their grandmother. If I talk about my cousin who we're playing with in the book, they will talk about their cousin. So they can put themselves in the story. And to tell you the truth, the Wanjiku Child of Mine is primarily based upon my story, but it's not a
Mhm.
unique story.
Mm.
It is a
You
story
when you
that
talk about her giving
yeah,
you your favorite, the bottom pot of the porridge, my grandmother used to try and coax me to eat by saying, "Look, it's the last bit of the soup today. So, eat it. It's special. It's delicious. It's fantastic when you do, it just brought me back memories of my own childhood. And I'm sure it will do that for a lot of other readers too.
yeah. And the thing about heritage too, which is the one that I think to me is the most important, because for us, especially who are immigrants here in the United States and anywhere else, right, across the world, you come here with this, at least when I came here, you have this big dream about, I'm going to America, I'm, going to embrace the American culture. And then you get here and you're like, America and anywhere abroad is a smorgasbord of people from all over. That's what makes this country. So you cannot forget who you are and where you come from. So holding on to heritage, holding on to your roots, I think are some of the things, the key takeaways that I want folks to be able to do that. But then again, really talking about that celebration of diverse stories and that everybody can take turns sharing their
Yes.
stories and everybody else can sit back and listen is really important.
Mm. Yeah, it is. It is. So, what's your process? Can you talk us through how you go from an idea, into a finished book?
Yes, it is a long process.
I
So
know.
I wrote a poem for my children when they were just 3 years old. I told you this was sort of where we started. And now, almost 13 years later, that poem evolved into a
Oh,
complete
your
picture.
kids are teenagers now.
Yes, they are.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's just the curveball I threw you. I mean, all of that to say that if you have a dream, hold on to it. Just
Yeah.
chunk at it slowly. But anyway, so crafting Wanjiku Child of Mine, first evolved from this idea. I had this idea of talking about the day in the life of a child and the
Mm-hmm.
different experiences and people that they're connecting with in
Mm-hmm.
the day, from morning to evening to noon, and then all the way to the evening. But what I really, really thought would be great is, you know, painting a picture about the full life. And when you think about your life, your morning is when you're born. Your afternoon is when you're getting to the full experience of who you are. And then the evening is sort of when you're sort of sunsetting, right? So I'm thinking about it in quadrants, that's in thirds. But from crafting the poem and then doing extensive research and exercise, especially around the themes like the creation story of the Gikuyu people.
Mm-hmm.
While I knew the story from my own childhood, you talked about Ngoge wa Thiong'o.
Yeah.
He's told the same story. We are passionate about this story. But while I knew it from my own childhood, I wanted to make sure that it resonated with a wider audience. So you have to then do partnerships. And I consulted with Jessica Powers of Catalyst Press,
Mm-hmm.
and she provided invaluable feedback on finding the right approach, the right tone of storytelling on paper. And we're talking about transitioning from oral tradition to written form. That is
Mm-hmm.
very, very challenging. Because my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother told me this story over and over. But I wanted to make sure that we can maintain the same spirit of authenticity that my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother and her mother and the generations before her used to pass down the story. So I leaned on my experience in bringing cultural arts program to young audiences. I've been doing this for over 13 years in the field, engaging young children with complex concepts like global citizenship and diversity. So using some of that experience to translate some of that story. But then what was really difficult, this is the third difficult part, right? Written form, words on paper. I'm thinking, okay, I put the words on paper. It's, I can see myself sort of having this conversation on stage with kids at a K through 6 student group. But if I'm not there, how are they going to paint the pictures if all they're getting is a piece of paper or a book? So then come partnerships again is the importance of partnering with exceptional illustrators. And Karen Vermeulen, who's got lots of experience with illustrating children's books, I think she's got one that is probably going to be a bestseller. Really took these words and helped us overcome that hurdle of written prose to visual images. So we had lots of collaborative discussions. I wanted to make sure that there was a feeling of movement in the visual storytelling. And I think the end result is something that I'm absolutely in love with
And you should be
that
proud of.
captured the essence of the story, and I
Yeah.
think will engage young readers.
It will, it will. I was going to ask you about the challenges of writing, as an adult for young people, but you explained, some of the challenges and how by collaborating you were able to kind of, get that mix that works so beautifully in your book. So apparently, with all those challenges and the fact that you struggled through overcoming them, it must be because it's important to you, this idea of having children's literature, that it's important for children to have, books. So what is the importance, in your opinion, of children's literature in fostering literacy and a love of reading? I'm assuming those are
That,
some of the things that motivated you to overcome those challenges so that
yeah,
yeah.
that is such an important question, Dr. Bumi. And I'm going to answer that by sharing with you some of the experience that I've recently had that actually opened up my eyes toward the gaps in literacy that I was not aware of. I'm not an educator, I'm a scientist by training, and that's my line of work, and love the idea of bringing cultural education to children and adults, and now doing this through writing. In some of the work that I do, I volunteer a lot, especially at my kids' school. And this year, they asked if I could represent the school at a conference in San Diego. It's called the CAAASA. That's the California Association of African American Administrators and Superintendents. Very long. And I intended, I had no expectations about what to get it there. I just wanted to go so I can bring back really good insights back to our school district. And what I learned from leading researchers in literacy that attended that concept was that literacy is fundamental to academic success.
Yeah, it is.
If you cannot comprehend what you're reading, you will not be able to understand the subject.
Yeah.
So we talk about, gaps in achievement, and especially African American students seem to be at the bottom of the totem pole. And we say you can read a proficiency level of second grade or whatever, but then we're not thinking about, as you're getting into those older classes, if we don't continue in focusing on literacy, your ability to read and understand the concepts, when it is important for you to dive into, say, a genetics class in biomed in high school, and you don't know what those words on paper are saying to you will not be successful. Not because you don't have the ability to understand it. You've not had your mind opened up enough to be able to look at the words on paper and understand. So literacy is fundamental to academic success.
Yeah.
And if we as those educators who are one of the things I think could be incredibly beneficial is to ensure that literacy is very much a part of every subject that it's taught. So before I start to read math, I want to make sure that the children I'm teaching understand how to read at the level that I'm teaching them, so that then I can get to the concept. So, and there's this other piece around, reading, right? When we were growing up, right? If you did something wrong, or I grew up in Kenya where academics are very important. If you came in and you failed, you were sent to your room to go and read. So children are associating reading with punishment.
Yeah. And
so it can hinder the proficiency in understanding concepts, right?
Yeah. And
so
was
I think
please
no, go ahead, Dr. Bumi. This is I know
one
we're
thing
both
you
passionate
also
about this.
mentioned was this making time to read and tell stories to your children, even when they were babies. It actually starts before they step into the classroom, which is what a lot of our kids from, maybe economically disadvantaged backgrounds suffer from. The idea that from those first 36 months of a child's life are the most crucial, in terms of socializing, and then getting to this rhythm, this tradition of reading with them before they're able to read, getting them to feel comfortable, with the feel of the book, of the paper, um, getting them to associate sounds with the written words. In other words, preparing children for success in school starts with that foundational preparation in storytelling, in literacy. It accounts for how long a child actually, how successful a child will be in school. For those of our colleagues on the continent, it's tied into how the dropout rate, education dropout rate. It's all connected.
Yes. No, you're right. I mean, if you foster a love for reading early, it will greatly enable a child to be successful. It
Yeah.
will position them really well to be able to grasp, those complex concepts later
Yes.
in their academic journey.
Yes.
They will be able to navigate complex subjects.
Mhm.
And so Wanjiku, child of mine, I talked about the idea of movement in the book that was really important for me. So that when you're reading, I want to encourage that sing song you feel. You've got intonation of voice, allowing for moving the voice up and down so that you're tantalizing all of the senses. It's not just visual, it's the sound, and they're
Yes.
touching the book and they're looking at the different colors. And you bring up a really good point, is as parents, we are the first teachers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have an opportunity to give them a heads, getting ahead a little bit sooner in
Yeah.
those first years of
Yeah.
growth that are
Yeah.
very critical.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So having said that, I'm curious. So which authors or books have influenced your writing the most?
So it's interesting you say this, because for anybody who grew up in Kenya, and I don't know how it is in Nigeria, we have set books. There's a set book list that you have to do through high school. So I'm talking about, I'm not going to age myself. Back in the 90s, I'm not going to tell anybody. You have this book, the set list of books that you have to do that are required literature.
Mhm.
And I'm so glad that African authors were included as part of our set list. Because if for anybody who grew up, especially in post-colonial era, there was the holdover from Western sort of literature that was forced
Mhm.
down throats. But I'm so
Mhm.
glad that we had African authors as part of our set list. Because
Mm.
I learned about Ngugi wa Thiong'o before I left Kenya. And he's one of my absolute favorite writers because of his
Yeah.
connection to the roots and
Yes.
his advocacy around heritage. So from that
Yes.
perspective, I really, really, really love his writings.
Yeah.
Um, and then other writers, of
Good
course.
Lord Child was something that I read over and over and over again growing up, and then The River Between. Those two books, they were just
Yes, yes. So it inspires you to celebrate diversity in storytelling and telling
yes.
traditions in
Yes.
children's literature. That's so important.
Yes.
Another one, so you're going to love this story. So Things Fall Apart was a book that we read.
Yes.
So fast forward about 2 months ago, my child and I are talking. And she comes home and she's struggling to tell me, Mom, we're reading this book. It's by an African author. She could not say Chinua Achebe, right? So we're sitting there and we started to reminisce together about excerpts, and she brought it back. And to me, it tells me that this remains such a profound book, even
Mhm.
so many decades later,
Yeah.
that I can experience it with my child.
Yeah. Yeah.
But imagining the ability of transcending populations, transcending the world. So it's not a book for Africa, it's a book for the
For the
world.
world. Yeah.
That my child here in America is reading that book with her American peers in classroom.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
It's amazing.
Of course, I have to say Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, because she's now elevated this to a level that is just, everybody's marveling. I think about African music that's now permeating the rest of the world,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I'm walking through a regular restaurant and I hear, so the same Chimamanda, I feel like, has done that same thing for us, for African
All right.
African authors. in literature. So are these authors who have incredible skill in captivating global audiences with narratives from Africa are very inspiring to me. And one last person I'm going to say is, of course, Lupita, who's from my country, right? With her book
She has
Solo.
a children's series, actually. She has
Yeah,
the children. She
that.
actually has the children. My grandkids watch her children's series. They actually introduced me to it.
So, I mean, now we're talking about this narrative that's now taking, it's just amazing because for me, it was the urgency that was needed. Because remember, this is a project that I started many, many years ago. The inspiration that I needed to urge me to put that story down because I saw myself reflected in her as an author. A lot older, but her as an, for me, a lot older, not her. So, again, just really marvel at folks who have incredible skill in speaking to wider audiences. And it was really important for me with Wanjiku Child of Mine. And we, I consulted with Jessica of Catalyst Press, and this was around the title of the book. Because I came to her, I was like, wow, I really want this to have the name that is the image that is being presented in the book. Like, but I worry that if I have a name that's so foreign, will foreign audiences want to read it? And she said, no. This is actually the reason why we need that. So felt very strong about actually calling it Wanjiku Child of Mine. And I said, some of those authors have really inspired me to just be confident about that journey.
Awesome. So what advice would you give to aspiring children's books writers?
Well, I still consider myself.
It's not a very easy field to navigate.
No, it's not. And I don't consider myself a novice in the world of children's book writing, but I can share some valuable lessons that I've learned along the way. One thing is to dream big. And you have to verbalize your aspirations. If you dream big and internalize it and don't say it, it will disappear in there. But if you verbalize it, if you write it down, if you share it with other people, you almost make yourself accountable for following through. And then it can be daunting, right? When you think about the whole process. So small actionable goals and make process, even when you're feeling overwhelmed, especially when you're researching new topics. For me, I found that, taking it one step at a time and moving forward. I remember when I was writing my dissertation for my master's degree over 13 years ago, it took me a very long time because I had children at the time. Every single day, I wrote something. So I cannot wait to hold the final printed copy of Wanjiku, sharing it with my teenagers. I know it took me a very long time, but I promise you, I will make them cuddle in bed with me. And I will open the book and we will read it before bedtime because it is something I promised them a long time ago and has taken a long time to get there. So it's not how you get there, it is when you get there. And the how might meander and go up and down, but just keep steadfast in the process. People need to hear our stories. Children need to hear stories that reflect them.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really, really good piece of advice for any up and coming writer at this point in time, especially those who are struggling. I mean, here is a little easier, but those who are writing on the continent, it's important for them to know that whatever contributions they can make, it's really, really important. Thanks for watching. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this kind of content. Also, check out our sankofastorybooks.com for Afrocentric stories, rhymes, history, and biographies for children.